Hey guys, settle here. Tonight we begin with something that sounds simple on the surface: hunter-gatherers. No cities. No kings. No supermarkets. No alarms pulling you out of sleep. No glowing screens lighting up the night. Just small groups of humans moving slowly across vast landscapes that could freeze you, starve you, or quietly test your survival every single day. And yet, these early humans were not lonely wanderers grunting at the horizon. They were social architects. They built invisible networks. They maintained friendships across miles of wilderness. They practiced diplomacy without paperwork. They shared food without contracts. They raised children collectively without parenting books. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy these slow journeys through history. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see how far these quiet stories travel. Now, dim the lights. Let the room cool. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft, steady hum. And let's gently step back tens of thousands of years. Imagine waking up before sunrise. There are no buildings around you. No streetlights. No roads. Just a pale band of light slowly forming behind distant hills. You're part of a small group, maybe 20 to 40 people. That's it. That's your entire society. No one you know lives in a city of thousands. No one has even seen one. Your world fits around a single campfire. And here's the surprising part. That small group is not chaotic. It's not disorganized. It's not barely surviving in confusion. It's structured. Not with written laws. Not with police. Not with official titles. But with shared expectations. With memory. With culture. Everyone understands their role, not assigned rigidly, but shaped by skill and personality. Some are better at tracking animals. Some know which plants will nourish and which will poison. Some are natural mediators when tension rises. Some are storytellers whose words hold the group together during long winters. In a band that small, conflict is not entertainment. It is dangerous. If two members refuse to cooperate, that's not social drama. That's a survival risk. Cooperation wasn't kindness. It was strategy. Imagine a successful hunt. After hours, maybe days, of tracking, surrounding, coordinating, a large animal is brought down. That animal represents enormous value: calories, fat, warmth, tools from bone and hide. And here is something that surprises many modern minds. The hunter who struck the final blow does not keep it. Food is shared. Systematically. Consistently. Because hoarding destabilizes small groups. Resentment builds fast when everyone depends on everyone else. So sharing becomes cultural glue. Not charity. Not generosity for applause. Stability. Hunter-gatherers survived not because they were the strongest individuals, but because they were extraordinarily skilled at being groups. Social intelligence was survival intelligence. Reading emotion. Detecting tension before it escalated. Knowing when someone felt excluded. Understanding alliances and repairing them gently. In a world without prisons or courts, relationships were everything. If someone became arrogant or boastful, there were quiet correction mechanisms. Humor. Light teasing. Mocking exaggeration. Not cruelty. Just enough to keep ego from inflating too far. Ego threatens equality. And equality protected cohesion. Leadership existed, but it was fluid. The best tracker might lead the hunt. The most experienced elder might guide a dispute. The most charismatic storyteller might shape ritual. Authority had to be earned repeatedly. It was not inherited and stored like property. And if someone tried to dominate, the group could simply leave. Mobility was freedom. Now imagine a child born into this world. That child does not belong only to two parents. They belong to the band. Aunts, uncles, older siblings, even unrelated adults help carry, feed, teach, protect. Cooperative child rearing wasn't ideology. It was efficiency. Parenting in harsh environments is exhausting. Shared care increases survival odds. Children grew up surrounded by constant interaction. Learning wasn't scheduled. It was embedded in daily life. They watched tool making. They listened to stories. They mimicked gathering techniques. They practiced with miniature tools. Education was immersive. After sunset, something important happened. The world grew dark. Predators stirred. Movement slowed. The group gathered closer to the fire. This is where identity deepened. Stories were told. Not random chatter. Stories about hunts, about ancestors, about strange weather, about lessons learned the hard way. Stories preserved memory. Before writing existed, memory was the archive. And storytelling reinforced belonging. This is who we are. This is what we survived. This is how we behave. Even conflict, when it arose, had limits. Jealousy existed. Competition existed. Humans have always been human. But in small bands, conflict could not be allowed to spiral endlessly. Sometimes, when tensions grew too high, groups split peacefully. A portion would leave and form a new band. Mobility prevented tyranny. No castles meant no locked power. Hunter-gatherers also maintained connections beyond their immediate group. Seasonal gatherings brought multiple bands together. These meetings weren't chaotic. They were social festivals. Goods were exchanged. Stories were shared. Marriage partners were found to prevent inbreeding. Alliances were strengthened. Obsidian tools found hundreds of miles from their natural source prove this network existed. Trust traveled without roads. Compassion also traveled. Skeletal remains show individuals who survived severe injuries, broken legs, crushed limbs, even blindness. A person with a broken leg cannot hunt. They survive only if others feed and protect them. Which means empathy is ancient. Caring for the vulnerable was not weakness. It was long-term strategy. Groups that protected members built loyalty. Loyalty built stability. The image of the lonely caveman dissolves under this evidence. They were deeply interconnected. Emotionally aware. Strategic in cooperation. Complex in communication. They navigated intricate relationship webs without writing, without digital communication, without formal law. And they did it successfully for tens of thousands of years. Now the fire burns low. The sky above is filled with stars unpolluted by electric light. The group rests close together. Quiet conversation drifts into soft laughter. Someone hums a familiar rhythm. Children lean against adults. There are no skyscrapers. No engines. No glowing screens. But there is structure. There is belonging. There is culture. There is humanity in its raw, unpolished, deeply social form. And perhaps, in some ways, more balanced than we often have today. Take a slow breath. Let the sound of that ancient fire settle into the background of your thoughts. The night deepens. The fire settles into glowing embers, no longer bright and loud, but steady, dependable. A few sparks rise into the darkness and disappear among the stars. Around the circle, breathing slows. Some are asleep. Some are half awake, listening to the soft murmur of two voices finishing a story. And here, in this quiet space between danger and dawn, we can begin to understand something even more subtle about hunter-gatherer life. Their emotional world. Because survival was not only about food and shelter. It was about managing feelings in a world where you could not simply walk away from people forever. In modern life, If tension grows too strong, you can block someone, move apartments, change jobs, disappear into digital distance. But in a small Ice Age band of 30 people, avoidance is not an option. You wake up next to the same people every day. You hunt with them. You eat with them. You rely on them when storms roll in. So emotional regulation becomes a survival skill. Patience becomes a survival skill. Forgiveness becomes a survival skill. Imagine two hunters arguing after a failed hunt. Perhaps one moved too early. Perhaps another misjudged the wind. Pride is bruised. Voices rise. In a modern setting, that argument might escalate through distance and silence. But here, the group cannot afford division. An elder might step in, not with authority enforced by power, but with calm words. Humor may soften the tension. Others may gently shift the topic. And over time, the argument dissolves. Not because people were morally superior, but because division was expensive. Social harmony reduced risk. Even jealousy, something as old as humanity itself, had to be managed carefully. Pair bonds existed, yes. Long-term partnerships were common. But the group was always watching, always aware of imbalances that might create instability. If one person hoarded affection or resources, subtle corrections followed. Teasing again. Public light-hearted commentary. These mechanisms might sound small, but they were powerful tools for keeping equality intact. Hunter-gatherer societies, in many studied cases, were remarkably egalitarian. Not perfectly equal, no human society is, but resistant to extreme hierarchy. Because hierarchy without infrastructure is fragile. A leader without guards, without stored wealth, without walls, cannot force obedience for long. If they attempt dominance, people simply leave. And leaving is always an option when you live in a mobile society. Mobility is quiet power. Now think about decision-making. Where would the group travel next? When would they move camp? Which valley held better water? Which region had more migrating animals this season? These decisions were rarely made by a single voice. They were discussed. Sometimes at length. Anthropologists observing modern hunter-gatherer groups describe long evening conversations where everyone speaks, sometimes indirectly, sometimes through storytelling, until a general consensus slowly forms. No votes. No ballots. Just gradual agreement. Consensus may take time, but it strengthens unity. When a decision is reached this way, everyone feels included. And inclusion increases commitment. Commitment increases survival. Even humor played a deeper role than we might assume. Laughter releases tension. In a dangerous environment, stress accumulates quickly. A failed hunt. A child's illness. Sudden bad weather. Humor acts as a pressure valve. Picture a storyteller dramatically reenacting a hunter slipping in mud while trying to appear heroic. The group laughs. The embarrassment softens. Stress dissolves slightly. And in that laughter, bonds tighten. Shared humor creates shared memory. Shared memory creates identity. Hunter-gatherers likely knew each other in ways we rarely know the people around us. They knew each other's childhood stories, strengths, weaknesses, fears. In a group that small, anonymity doesn't exist. You are seen. Fully. And while that might sound uncomfortable to modern ears, it also creates deep belonging. Loneliness, as we understand it today, isolation among millions, was rare in such bands. Physical danger was common. Emotional abandonment was not. Now imagine seasonal gatherings. Several bands converging near a river valley during migration season. Fires multiplied across the landscape. Old friends reunited after months apart. News exchanged. Births celebrated. Deaths remembered. Young adults meeting potential partners from other groups, strengthening genetic diversity and social alliances at once. Trade happened here too. Not just goods, those stone tools, hides, shells, pigments changed hands, but ideas. New hunting strategies. New stories. New songs. Culture traveled through these gatherings like sparks carried by wind. And because there were no permanent cities, these meetings likely felt electric. Temporary but powerful. Then, after days or weeks, groups separated again. Returning to smaller circles. Carrying with them new connections. Injury and illness still existed. Life expectancy was shorter than today. But within those years, there is evidence of deep care. Skeletons show healed fractures that required months of support. Elders lived long enough to lose teeth completely, and survived, meaning others prepared soft food for them. The elderly were not discarded. They were libraries. They held memory. In a world without writing, elders were living archives of migration routes, seasonal timing, dangerous territories, plant knowledge. To lose an elder was to lose information. Respect for age was practical wisdom. Now consider how children experienced this world. They grew up not in isolated nuclear families, but surrounded constantly by multi-generational interaction. They played freely, often with minimal direct supervision, learning risk assessment naturally. They climbed. They explored. They imitated adult tasks. Play itself was preparation. A mock hunt among children rehearsed real coordination. A playful argument rehearsed emotional negotiation. Skills were absorbed rather than formally taught. And because children observed adults constantly, social norms were internalized without lectures. Fairness was modeled. Sharing was modeled. Calm conflict resolution was modeled. Culture passed quietly, daily. Hunter-gatherer life was not utopia. Food shortages occurred. Weather shifted unpredictably. Predators were real threats. But socially, these groups were remarkably stable for tens of thousands of years. Which raises an interesting thought. Agriculture came much later. Cities came much later. Inequality at massive scale came much later. For most of human existence, we lived like this, in small, mobile, emotionally intelligent bands. No palaces. No prisons. No extreme wealth gaps. Just shared risk. Shared reward. Shared identity. As the embers fade completely and the night cools further, the group sleeps. Curled beneath hides. Close enough to feel warmth. Secure not because the world is safe, but because they are together. And perhaps that, more than tools, more than fire, more than weapons, was the true secret of their survival. Take another slow breath. Let the quiet of that ancient night settle around you. Morning arrives quietly. There is no alarm. No sudden noise. Just a gradual shift in temperature and light. The sky softens from black to deep blue. A thin ribbon of gold stretches along the horizon. One by one, people stir. Someone adds small sticks to the embers. A faint crackle returns. A child rolls over and presses closer to a sleeping adult. An elder sits upright first, watching the landscape with practiced stillness. The day begins not with urgency, but with awareness. Hunter-gatherer life moved in rhythms. Not clock time. Not appointments. Rhythms. The rhythm of hunger. The rhythm of migration. The rhythm of seasons turning slowly across vast land. And within those rhythms, something else shaped their social world. Reputation. In a small band, reputation is everything. You cannot reinvent yourself easily. You cannot escape your history. If you are generous, people remember. If you are selfish, people remember. If you are brave, reckless, patient, short-tempered, it all becomes part of the collective memory. Reputation acted as a quiet regulating force. A consistently generous person gained trust. A reliable hunter gained respect. A calm mediator gained influence. But influence never hardened into rigid class systems. Because tomorrow, the generous person might fail a hunt. The brave hunter might make a mistake. Status was fluid. And fluid systems are resilient. There is something else deeply important here: vulnerability. Modern culture often rewards independence above all else. But in hunter-gatherer bands, vulnerability was visible and accepted. If you were injured, others saw it. If you were grieving, others felt it. If you were afraid, it showed. Emotions were not hidden behind walls or screens. And because survival required interdependence, vulnerability did not automatically mean weakness. It meant reality. Grief, especially, must have been a profound experience. Death was closer then. Not abstract, not distant. When someone died, it happened within the group's physical space. Their absence was felt in the circle that night. Burial practices show intention. Care. Sometimes grave goods. Sometimes flowers or pigment. Even tens of thousands of years ago, humans paused to acknowledge loss. Grief likely strengthened social bonds rather than shattering them. Shared mourning creates shared memory. And memory strengthens identity. Now imagine a season of scarcity. The animals migrate unexpectedly. Plants fail earlier than usual. The river shrinks faster this year. Anxiety rises, not dramatically, but subtly. Conversations change tone. People move more cautiously. Rations adjust. In such times, social cohesion becomes even more critical. Blame could easily fracture a group. But groups that survived long-term likely practiced restraint. Instead of immediate accusation, they focused on collective adaptation. Move earlier. Split into smaller foraging units. Reconnect later. Flexibility again. Mobility again. The ability to change course without collapsing socially was one of their greatest strengths. And here is something quietly profound. For over 90% of human history, this was normal life. Not an experiment. Not a transitional phase. The dominant human experience. Cities, agriculture, empires, these are recent developments compared to the vast span of hunter-gatherer existence. Which means our brains evolved primarily for this small group structure. 30 to 50 familiar faces. Direct accountability. Shared labor. Shared storytelling. Shared risk. It explains something about modern discomfort. Large anonymous crowds. Social media audiences of thousands. Abstract institutions. Our nervous systems did not form in skyscrapers. They formed around fires. There is another layer to consider: fairness. Studies of modern hunter-gatherer societies show extremely strong reactions to unfair distribution of resources. If someone attempted to hoard, others intervened socially. Not violently. But firmly. Fairness was not philosophical. It was stabilizing. In small bands, extreme inequality breeds resentment quickly. And resentment can split a group. So fairness became instinct reinforced by culture. It may even explain why modern humans across cultures have deep emotional reactions to perceived injustice. Those reactions are ancient. Now picture late afternoon. Some members return from gathering. Others from tracking small game. Children carry bundles of sticks. Laughter rises as someone describes slipping in shallow water. Food is prepared. Shared again. And during this ordinary moment, something extraordinary is happening. Knowledge transfer. A young person watches how an elder prepares a specific route safely, removing toxins with careful scraping and soaking. Another observes how to repair a spear point using stone pressure flaking. No formal lesson. No classroom. Just observation and repetition. Culture lives in motion. And because the group is small, mistakes are noticed quickly. Corrected gently. Repeated until skill settles into muscle memory. Competence is visible. Improvement is visible. In modern life, effort often disappears into abstraction. In hunter-gatherer life, effort is immediate and shared. You see who contributes. You see who struggles. You see who grows. And because everyone is seen, motivation is social. Now consider night again. But this time, imagine a child lying awake, listening to distant animal calls. They are not afraid in the way we might expect. Because fear is contextual. They have grown within this landscape. Learned its sounds. Recognized patterns. The crack of a branch means one thing. The low rumble of a predator means another. Knowledge reduces panic. And knowledge is shared constantly. Hunter-gatherer children likely developed extraordinary situational awareness early. Not through pressure, but through immersion. Now imagine generations passing. Grandparents telling stories of a valley once fertile but now dry. Parents recalling a harsh winter survived through cooperation. Children growing into adults who will repeat these stories. No monuments. No written chronicles. But continuity. For tens of thousands of years, this pattern held. Small bands. Shared food. Fluid leadership. Consensus decisions. Seasonal gatherings. Deep emotional awareness. It was not perfect. It was not free from hardship. But it was stable. And stability across millennia suggests something deeply functional about their social design. As the final light fades again and the sky darkens into that familiar prehistoric brilliance of stars, the group settles once more. A baby shifts in sleep. An adult adjusts a hide to block wind. Someone murmurs a final sentence of a story unfinished. The world beyond their circle remains unpredictable. But inside that circle, there is order. Not imposed. Emergent. Human. Take another slow breath. Feel that ancient rhythm: wake, move, gather, share, rest. The seasons begin to turn. Not dramatically at first. Not with a single decision or a sudden invention. Just small adjustments. A group lingers a little longer in one valley than usual because wild grains are growing thick near the riverbanks. Someone notices that seeds dropped near last year's campsite have sprouted in clusters. Another realizes that returning to the same clearing produces familiar results. Patterns. Humans are excellent at recognizing patterns. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, a new rhythm begins to overlap the old one. Instead of moving constantly with food, food begins to stay where humans are. At first, this feels like an advantage. Less walking. More predictability. Perhaps more children surviving infancy. But predictability changes social dynamics. When people move frequently, possessions remain minimal. You carry what you can lift. Mobility limits accumulation. When people stay longer in one place, accumulation begins. Extra tools. Stored grain. Built shelters that feel semi-permanent. Storage introduces a new concept, ownership in a different sense. In a fully mobile band, sharing is natural because hoarding is impractical. But when food can be stored, when surplus can exist, something subtle shifts. Who controls the storage? Who decides how much is distributed? Who guards it? These questions may not have appeared overnight, but over generations, they grew more common. And with them, hierarchy slowly found room to root itself. Agriculture did not instantly erase the social intelligence of hunter-gatherers. But it stretched it. Small bands of 30 became villages of 100. 100 became several hundred. At that scale, consensus takes longer. Reputation becomes harder to track personally. Not everyone knows everyone deeply anymore. Anonymity begins to creep in. And anonymity changes behavior. When you are known intimately by 30 people, selfishness carries immediate consequences. When you are one among hundreds, consequences blur. This is not moral decline. It is scale. Human psychology evolved in small circles. Agriculture expanded the circle faster than our instincts adapted. With permanent settlements came fixed land. With fixed land came boundaries. With boundaries came defense. And defense required organized leadership. Leadership that was once fluid began to solidify. Roles hardened. Some people farmed constantly. Others specialized in toolmaking. Some guarded food stores. Specialization increases efficiency. But it also increases difference. Difference can become inequality if not carefully balanced. Stored food becomes wealth. Wealth becomes power. Power, once stabilized, resists being shared as fluidly as before. Over centuries, what began as subtle shifts formed the foundation for cities. And cities, for all their innovation and brilliance, altered the intimacy of human social life. In a city, you do not know everyone around you. You cannot rely solely on reputation. You rely on systems. Rules written down. Enforced by authority. Contracts replace memory. Currency replaces reciprocal sharing. Institutions replace informal consensus. None of this is inherently wrong. But it is different. Very different from the circle of 30 around a fire. As villages grew, so did conflict at larger scales. Raids for stored food. Disputes over fertile land. The cost of conflict increased because there was now more to lose. Hunter-gatherer bands could split and move. Farmers tied to land cannot move as easily. Mobility, once a pressure release valve, became restricted. And when mobility shrinks, tension accumulates. Inequality, once limited by cultural leveling mechanisms, found fewer barriers. Those who controlled land and surplus could consolidate influence. Generations later, this influence crystallized into early states. Kings. Armies. Tax systems. Walls. It is important to remember that this transformation unfolded over thousands of years. No one woke up one morning and declared, "Let us abandon small band egalitarianism and invent hierarchy." It was gradual. Adaptive. Often beneficial in certain ways. Agriculture supported larger populations. It allowed technological specialization. It eventually led to writing, medicine, architecture. But something intimate was diluted. In cities of thousands, then millions, humans still carry the nervous system shaped around 30 familiar faces. We crave belonging at a scale our ancestors understood. We react strongly to unfairness because in small bands, unfairness threatens survival. We experience loneliness even surrounded by crowds because our brains expect deeper mutual recognition. The secret social lives of hunter-gatherers did not vanish entirely. They linger inside us. In our need for friendship circles. In our preference for small gatherings over massive anonymity. In our instinct to share meals as bonding rituals. Even modern dinner tables echo ancient campfires. Think of it. Food placed in the center. Conversation flowing. Stories exchanged. Laughter rising in flickers. It is not so different. Now imagine that original band one last time. The fire crackling. The circle small enough that every face is familiar. No written laws, but clear expectations. No police, but strong reputation. No wealth inequality large enough to fracture unity. Just shared vulnerability and shared strength. For tens of thousands of years, this system worked. It carried our species through ice ages, predators, volcanic winters, and migration across continents. It required intelligence not just of tools, but of hearts and minds. emotional calibration, patience, humor, forgiveness, cooperation. These were not optional virtues. They were survival strategies. As the night settles once more and the prehistoric sky stretches endlessly above that quiet circle, there is a feeling of balance. Not perfection. Not ease. But balance. And perhaps the reason their social lives feel so fascinating to us now, is because, somewhere deep beneath modern complexity, we recognize it. We recognize the circle. We recognize the firelight. We recognize the comfort of being known. Take one more slow breath. Let that ancient rhythm settle softly in your thoughts. Small group. Shared food. Shared story. Shared survival. And as you drift toward rest, remember this. Long before cities and crowns, before borders and empires, before walls and wealth, we survived because we stayed together. And in many ways, we still do. And yet, even as agriculture spread, even as villages thickened into towns and towns into cities, the old patterns never fully disappeared. They simply retreated into smaller spaces. Inside every growing settlement, people still formed circles. Families clustered together. Craftspeople worked side by side. Neighbors relied on neighbors during storms, illness, childbirth. Even in the earliest cities, humans recreated the band within the crowd. Because psychologically, we still required it. Anthropologists sometimes speak of a cognitive limit, a rough number of stable social relationships a human can maintain deeply. It isn't precise, and it varies, but it hovers far below the population of even a modest town. Which means that even as populations exploded, our inner social world remained small. We still track reputation most clearly within limited circles. We still feel most secure when recognized regularly. We still share food as a primary bonding ritual. We still tell stories at night. The architecture changed. The instincts did not. Imagine a farming village several thousand years after those first lingering camps by the river. Mud brick homes stand close together. Fields stretch outward in neat rows. Grain is harvested and stored. But at sunset, people still gather. Not around a roaming campfire, but within courtyards. Children play under watchful eyes. Elders recount familiar stories. Laughter echoes off walls instead of trees. The scale is different. The essence is not. Yet scale continues to grow. Trade routes expand. Surplus increases. Specialization deepens. Some people farm. Others build. Others govern. Roles become hereditary in some regions. Authority consolidates. Where once humor could gently deflate arrogance in a small band, now power requires more formal checks. Laws emerge. Punishments formalize. Because when thousands live together, subtle teasing is no longer sufficient regulation. Complexity demands structure. But structure comes at a cost. In small bands, accountability is immediate and personal. In large systems, accountability becomes abstract. You might never meet the person affected by your actions. Distance grows, physically and emotionally. And yet, inside these expanding systems, humans still carve out small group belonging. Guilds. Religious congregations. Extended families. Military units. Every large civilization is composed of many small circles stitched together. We build cities, and then we build neighborhoods within them. We build nations, and then we build friend groups inside them. It is as if the ancient band refuses to disappear. Because it cannot. It shaped us. Now return one final time to that Ice Age landscape. Wind moving gently across tall grasses. A cluster of hide shelters near a river bend. 30 humans moving through their day, gathering, repairing tools, watching children chase each other between stones. There is no written language here. No monumental architecture. No permanent borders. But there is an extraordinary social achievement. A system that maintained cohesion without centralized authority. A structure that limited inequality without prisons. A culture that valued sharing not as moral performance, but as survival necessity. For tens of thousands of years, this worked. It carried us across continents. It allowed us to endure volcanic winters, predators larger than modern cars, sudden climate shifts, and the constant unpredictability of wild ecosystems. It did so not through domination, but through cooperation. Not through accumulation, but through distribution. Not through rigid hierarchy, but through flexible leadership. And perhaps the most astonishing part is this. They did all of it without fully understanding the science behind what they were doing. No psychology textbooks. No evolutionary theory. No sociology departments. Just observation. Memory. Adaptation. And an intuitive grasp of something fundamental. We survive better together. As the fire dims and the group settles into sleep once more, the stars above remain indifferent and immense. The world beyond their circle is still dangerous. But inside that circle, there is warmth. Trust. Familiar breathing in the dark. That simple arrangement, a small group choosing daily to cooperate, may be the quiet foundation of everything that followed. Cities rose. Empires fell. Technologies transformed. But the social blueprint formed in those early bands still hums beneath modern life. In every shared meal. In every inside joke. In every small gathering where people feel safe enough to be seen. So as you drift toward rest tonight, imagine that ancient circle one last time. No noise but wind and fire. No schedule but sunrise. No currency but trust. 30 humans holding each other's survival in balance, and succeeding. That is the secret social life of hunter-gatherers. Not primitive. Not simplistic. But profoundly, elegantly human. And in many quiet ways. Still alive within us. And even after everything we've walked through, there is still one more layer to this ancient social world that's worth lingering on. Because hunter-gatherer life was not only about cooperation and fairness. It was also about time. Specifically, how they experienced it. Modern life slices time into tight segments. Minutes. Deadlines. Notifications. Productivity measured and monitored. But in small prehistoric bands, time moved differently. There were busy days, of course. Intense hunts. Long tracking efforts. Urgent responses to danger. But there were also long stretches of unstructured hours. Anthropological studies of recent hunter-gatherer societies suggest that, contrary to popular belief, many worked fewer total hours per week gathering food than modern full-time workers do today. This doesn't mean life was easy. It means labor was purposeful and bounded. When food was secured for the day, the pressure eased. And what filled the remaining time? Conversation. Tool repair. Storytelling. Rest. Observation. Children playing freely. Adults sitting in loose circles, talking quietly about nothing urgent. In those spaces, social bonds deepened. Modern loneliness often grows not from lack of contact, but from lack of unstructured presence. Hunter-gatherers had presence in abundance. They saw each other not only during crisis or task completion, but in stillness. And stillness allows nuance. You notice subtle changes in someone's mood. You notice when a child grows braver climbing rocks. You notice when an elder's voice grows softer with age. Nothing is rushed. Even movement across landscapes followed seasonal patience. If animals moved north, the band followed north. If winter pressed in, they adjusted. There was no illusion of control over the planet. Only adaptation within it. And adaptation requires attentiveness. This attentiveness likely shaped their psychology profoundly. They read clouds. They read tracks. They read each other. Constantly. That kind of awareness fosters humility. You cannot dominate an ice age. You can only respond wisely. And that humility may have softened certain forms of arrogance. When survival depends on group cohesion and environmental respect, excessive pride becomes risky. Now imagine a disagreement not about food or jealousy, but about direction. Two experienced trackers disagree on which valley to follow. There is tension, but no instant vote. Discussion unfolds slowly. Evidence is recalled. Past experiences referenced. Perhaps they compromise, sending a small scouting group before committing the whole band. Flexibility again. Decision-making is process rather than decree. These small patterns repeated thousands of times over generations. And repetition forms culture. Culture then shapes expectation. Expectation shapes instinct. By the time agriculture appeared, humans were already deeply social specialists. We did not invent cooperation with farming. We inherited it from tens of thousands of years of small band living. Agriculture scaled cooperation. But the roots were ancient. Even our capacity for empathy likely expanded in that era. In small bands, you witness suffering directly. If someone is injured, you see the limp daily. If someone grieves, you hear it in their breathing at night. Distance dulls empathy. Proximity sharpens it. Hunter-gatherers lived in constant proximity. This may explain why modern humans still respond intensely to individual stories more than statistics. One face moves us more than thousands of numbers. Because our brains evolved to track individuals, not populations. Now imagine a particularly cold winter night. Wind pressing hard against makeshift shelters. Children tucked tightly against adults. Food stores lower than comfortable. Fear is present, but shared. And in shared fear, something paradoxical happens. Closeness increases. People speak more softly. Movements become protective. Risk becomes communal. And in surviving that winter together, trust deepens permanently. Shared hardship builds durable bonds. This was repeated across millennia. Droughts. Storms. Predator encounters. Illness outbreaks. Each survived collectively reinforced the value of unity. By the time civilization emerged, cooperation was not a new invention. It was ancient muscle memory. What changed was scale. Scale complicates everything. In a band of 30, trust is personal. In a nation of millions, trust becomes institutional. In a band, fairness is immediate. In a state, fairness is legislated. In a band, leadership is fluid. In an empire, leadership hardens. Neither system is purely good or bad. They solve different problems. But the small band system solved the problem of human connection with remarkable efficiency. And perhaps that is why we feel nostalgia for simplicity even if we have never lived it. Somewhere deep within, our nervous systems recognize that ancient template. The circle. The shared meal. The slow conversation under stars. We may live in apartments and cities now. We may navigate digital networks instead of seasonal migration routes. But we still crave recognition within a manageable circle. We still measure safety by social warmth. We still calm down when sitting among trusted people. The secret social lives of hunter-gatherers were not dramatic. They were not filled with grand monuments or recorded speeches. They were built from thousands of small daily acts of cooperation. Passing food. Listening patiently. Sharing stories. Correcting arrogance gently. Caring for the injured. Raising children together. Leaving when tension grew too high. Returning when trust was rebuilt. These quiet mechanisms formed the backbone of human survival longer than any empire has lasted. Empires rise and fall in centuries. Hunter-gatherer social systems endured for tens of thousands of years. That longevity alone deserves attention. As we let the final image settle, a small band under a vast sky, breathing slowly beside fading embers, there is something peaceful about it. No urgency beyond tomorrow's food. No ambition beyond group well-being. No illusion of permanent control. Just presence. Cooperation. Adaptation. And a profound understanding, earned through experience, that survival is shared. Take one last slow breath. Imagine the wind moving gently across open land. The fire dim but warm. 30 humans resting in quiet trust. Long before cities. Long before borders. Long before written law. They had already mastered something essential. How to live together. And that mastery, more than any tool or weapon, is why we are here at all. And if we keep walking forward through time, if we allow the centuries to unfold without rushing them, we begin to see something remarkable. The hunter-gatherer band did not vanish. It scaled. It disguised itself. It fragmented and reassembled. But it never truly disappeared. When the first true cities formed in places like Uruk and Jericho, thousands of people suddenly lived within walls. Labor became specialized. Writing emerged. Authority hardened into offices rather than temporary roles. And yet inside those cities, the pattern persisted. Potters lived near potters. Farmers traded within familiar networks. Temple communities formed tight devotional circles. Even kings relied on small councils of trusted advisors. The scale of civilization grew, but trust still functioned locally. This is not accidental. Our brains evolved for intimacy at manageable size. We recognize faces best in limited numbers. We detect subtle tone shifts in people we see regularly. We calibrate fairness most accurately when consequences are visible. When systems grow too large, something strange happens. Anonymity appears. And anonymity changes behavior. In small bands, generosity is remembered. In massive populations, generosity can vanish into abstraction. In small bands, selfishness carries immediate social cost. In large societies, selfishness can hide behind distance. So civilizations invented tools to compensate. Religion to internalize moral behavior. Law to formalize fairness. Currency to standardize exchange. Writing to extend memory beyond the mind. All of these innovations can be seen as solutions to a scaling problem. How do you maintain cooperation when you can no longer know everyone personally? That question has driven human history more than most wars. Take the growth of ancient empires. The administrative machinery of states like ancient Rome depended on roads, records, taxation systems, and legal codes. But Roman soldiers still formed tight units that functioned like extended families. Merchants still relied on personal trust networks. Households still centered around shared meals. The empire was vast. The emotional life of its citizens was small-scale. The pattern repeats again in medieval towns. Guild halls. Parish communities. Market squares. Large kingdoms such as Kingdom of England operated through layers of loyalty, but those loyalties were grounded in direct relationships. Even in modern nations, where millions share a flag and language, the deepest psychological bonds remain intimate. Family. Close friends. Work teams. Neighborhood groups. Online communities that mimic village familiarity. We have globalized our economies and digitized our communication, yet we still crave the small circle. Why? Because our nervous systems have not fundamentally changed. When we gather in small groups, stress levels often drop. When we eat together, oxytocin rises. When we share stories face-to-face, neural synchrony increases. These are biological echoes of ancient survival structures. The modern world sometimes feels overwhelming precisely because it exceeds our ancestral bandwidth. News cycles compress global crises into handheld screens. Social media expands comparison beyond anything our ancestors experienced. We are exposed to thousands of faces we will never meet. Our cognitive wiring strains under scale. And so we instinctively shrink our focus. We mute notifications. We curate friend lists. We retreat into trusted circles. In doing so, we are not regressing. We are recalibrating. Returning, in subtle ways, to a design older than agriculture. Consider something simple. Shared meals. Across cultures, across centuries, communal eating remains one of the most persistent rituals. From ancient hearths to modern dining tables, food signals safety and belonging. In hunter-gatherer bands, sharing meat after a hunt reinforced equality and cooperation. Today, inviting someone to dinner still communicates trust. The technology has changed. The psychology has not. Or consider storytelling. In those early bands, stories carried survival information, which plants heal, which paths are safe, which behaviors disrupt harmony. Stories also transmitted identity. Who we are. Where we came from. What we value. Now we stream narratives across the planet. We watch films, read novels, share podcasts. The medium evolved. The function remains. Stories bind groups. They synchronize emotion. They define us. Even modern workplaces often unconsciously replicate band dynamics. Small project teams function best when trust is high. Leadership is more effective when relational rather than purely authoritative. Conflict resolves faster when participants feel seen. Corporate language may be new. The social blueprint is ancient. And here lies a quiet tension. We live in megastructures. Nations with hundreds of millions. Cities with populations exceeding entire ancient civilizations. Digital networks connecting billions. Yet our psychological comfort still rests in circles small enough to fit around a fire. This mismatch creates both challenge and opportunity. The challenge, how to maintain empathy at scale. The opportunity, recognizing that even in massive systems, change begins locally. One conversation. One shared effort. One small group acting in coordination. History's most transformative movements often begin not with vast crowds, but with small committed circles. A handful of people aligned in purpose can ripple outward. Just as it always has. So when we look back at hunter-gatherer societies, we are not peering into a primitive relic. We are examining a foundational operating system. One that shaped cooperation, fairness instincts, humor as social correction, storytelling as identity glue, and food sharing as moral architecture. Agriculture did not overwrite it. Empires did not erase it. Technology has not replaced it. It is still running beneath the surface. If you strip away skyscrapers, remove traffic noise, silence digital alerts, and gather a few trusted people in one room, what emerges? Conversation. Laughter. Shared vulnerability. The ancient rhythm returns. Not because we are nostalgic. But because we are wired that way. And perhaps this is the most important insight of all. The success of our species did not depend solely on intelligence or tools. It depended on social design. Flexible leadership. Egalitarian pressure. Collective child rearing. Reputation awareness. Conflict management without annihilation. These traits allowed small groups to endure. Those small groups scaled into tribes. Tribes into chiefdoms. Chiefdoms into states. States into nations. But the original pattern still quietly governs how we feel safe, how we bond, how we define fairness. As the night deepens once more in our imagined ancient camp, the fire finally collapses into embers. Someone stirs in sleep. a child shifts closer to a parent. The group rests, not because the world is safe, but because together, they are safer than alone. That equation has never stopped being true. And in a world of unprecedented complexity, perhaps the oldest lesson remains the most stabilizing. Find your circle. Care for it. Share within it. Hold each other accountable with kindness. Tell stories. Eat together. Protect the vulnerable. Laugh at arrogance. And remember that before there were cities, before there were crowns, before there were borders, there were small bands of humans, huddled beneath vast skies, choosing cooperation again and again. Everything else grew from that choice. And if we allow the silence after that thought to linger just a little longer, something else begins to emerge. The hunter-gatherer world was not utopia. It was not effortless harmony. There were conflicts, jealousies, grief, hard winters, failed hunts, loss that cut deep and left no written record. But what makes those societies extraordinary is not that they avoided difficulty. It is that they developed social tools to absorb it. When a hunt failed, blame could not spiral endlessly, because tomorrow required cooperation again. When tension rose between two individuals, others stepped in, not as judges above them, but as mediators within the same fragile ecosystem. When someone grew too domineering, humor trimmed the excess. When someone withdrew, others noticed. Attention itself was a survival mechanism. In small groups, invisibility is rare. And that can be uncomfortable. But it can also be protective. In modern life, it is possible to disappear socially while standing in a crowd of thousands. In small bands, your absence was felt immediately. Your mood mattered. Your contribution mattered. Your well-being mattered. Not because of sentimentality. Because interdependence made indifference too costly. This constant awareness shaped emotional intelligence long before psychology named it. Reading faces. Tracking tone. Anticipating reaction. Calibrating generosity. Sensing when to speak and when to stay silent. These were not optional social skills. They were daily necessities. And over tens of thousands of years, they shaped our neural architecture. Which raises a powerful question. What happens when we no longer rely on those skills in the same way? When algorithms filter communication. When written messages replace facial expression. When digital distance softens immediate consequences. Some capacities may dull. Others may transform. But the underlying need for belonging does not evaporate. It adapts. Look at teenagers forming tight friend groups in schools. Look at coworkers bonding under shared deadlines. Look at online communities built around niche interests. These are not modern inventions. They are ancient patterns expressed through new mediums. Even sports fandom mirrors tribal cohesion. Shared symbols. Collective chanting. Ritual gatherings. The scale may involve stadiums rather than riverbanks, but the emotional circuitry is strikingly familiar. We still divide into us and them. We still defend group identity. We still celebrate shared victories. These instincts can build solidarity. They can also generate conflict. Because the same mechanisms that strengthen internal bonds can harden external boundaries. In small bands, others were rare and distant. In a globalized world, others are constant and visible. Our tribal wiring now operates on a planetary stage. Which means the challenge of our era may not be to abandon ancient instincts, but to consciously expand them. To apply the empathy reserved for small circles more broadly. To recognize that cooperation at scale is an extension of band-level cooperation, not its opposite. In hunter-gatherer societies, generosity increased status more reliably than hoarding. Today, visibility can reward both generosity and spectacle. So we must choose which signals to amplify. Remember, In those early camps, reputation was everything. You could not fake contribution for long. You could not hide selfishness behind distance. Behavior echoed through the group daily. Modern life diffuses reputation across vast networks. But in our immediate circles, the ancient rules still apply. Trust builds slowly. Breaks quickly. Repairs through consistent action. Nothing about that has changed. And perhaps this is why so many people, even in technologically advanced societies, feel drawn to experiences that simulate small group intensity. Camping trips. Retreats. Team-building exercises. Religious pilgrimages. Music festivals. Moments where large crowds subdivide into pockets of shared rhythm. For a few hours or days, we feel synchronized. The nervous system recognizes the pattern. Shared effort. Shared environment. Shared attention. It feels grounding because it is ancestral. Even crisis reveals this pattern. When disaster strikes, strangers often form rapid micro-communities. People distribute food. Share information. Offer shelter. For brief windows, modern anonymity dissolves and the band reappears. Cooperation spikes. Hierarchy softens. Collective survival instincts activate. Then normalcy returns. But the capacity remains. It always has. So what does this mean for the future? We are entering eras our ancestors could not imagine. Artificial intelligence. Space exploration. Genetic engineering. Hyperconnected digital ecosystems. The scale of human systems will likely continue expanding. But our core design remains rooted in Ice Age camps. If we ignore that, we risk building structures that overwhelm our psychological limits. If we respect it, we can design communities, even digital ones, that mimic healthy small group dynamics. Clear norms. Mutual accountability. Shared purpose. Rotating leadership. Visible contribution. Opportunities for humor and storytelling. Emotional transparency. These are not sentimental ideals. They are evolution-tested frameworks. The hunter-gatherer band lasted longer than any empire in history. Longer than any monarchy. Longer than any industrial system. Its durability came not from technological dominance, but from relational resilience. And as we sit here now, under electric light instead of starlight, the lesson is quietly available. Progress does not require abandoning our social origins. It requires understanding them. We can build vast networks while preserving intimate circles. We can scale cooperation without erasing connection. We can innovate without forgetting that trust begins face to face. So imagine, one last time, that ancient fire. Not as nostalgia. Not as fantasy. But as foundation. A circle of humans who did not know they were shaping the future. Who simply woke each day and chose to share. To contribute. To listen. To correct gently. To protect collectively. They had no concept of civilization. Yet they built its social spine. And every time we sit with people we trust. Every time we share food. Every time we laugh at ourselves instead of dominating others. Every time we cooperate rather than isolate. We echo them. Not because we are primitive. But because we are human. And the quiet wisdom of those small bands still lives in our instincts. Waiting for us to remember it. And remembering it may be the most radical act available to us. Because modern life constantly invites fragmentation. Work in one sphere. Family in another. Friends somewhere else. Online identity floating above it all. We switch roles dozens of times a day, adapting language, posture, even personality depending on context. But in a hunter-gatherer band, roles overlapped. The person who joked with you at dusk might depend on you at dawn. The one who challenged you in disagreement might help carry your child across a flooded crossing. Identity was layered, but not compartmentalized beyond recognition. Consistency mattered. You could not afford to be fundamentally different versions of yourself in separate arenas. Reputation traveled instantly within the group. That coherence created psychological integration. Modern humans often experience the opposite, a kind of social scattering. And the nervous system can interpret that as instability. So the desire to simplify, to find spaces where you can be the same person throughout, is not laziness. It is alignment. The band offered alignment. Your skills were visible. Your weaknesses were known. Your history was remembered. That memory created belonging. Today, digital archives remember data about us, but not necessarily context. They store fragments, not lived nuance. In small groups, nuance thrives. People know your backstory. They understand when you are quiet because they recognize your patterns. They adjust because they care about continuity. Continuity is deeply regulating. When hunter-gatherer groups moved seasonally, they did so together. Shared displacement is less destabilizing than solitary change. Modern mobility, moving cities, changing schools, shifting careers, can be exhilarating. But it also repeatedly resets social ecosystems. Each reset requires rebuilding trust from scratch. Which is cognitively expensive. Emotionally demanding. The ancient band rarely reset entirely. Membership changed slowly. Loss occurred, yes, through death or dispersal, but the core tended to persist. That persistence allowed deep relational roots. We still seek that today. Long-term friendships. Communities that span decades. Mentors who know us across life stages. The desire for continuity is ancestral. It is not weakness. It is design. And yet, we must not romanticize the past. Small groups could also be constraining. Norms could limit individuality. Departure could mean danger. Innovation could be resisted. The same cohesion that provided safety could restrict freedom. Every social system contains trade-offs. The brilliance of humanity has been its capacity to experiment with structure. Bands. Tribes. City-states. Empires. Nation-states. Democracies. Digital networks. Each iteration solves certain problems and introduces new ones. What the hunter-gatherer blueprint offers is not a model to copy exactly. It offers principles. Interdependence over isolation. Reputation over anonymity. Shared resources over extreme accumulation. Flexible leadership over rigid dominance. Direct communication over distant abstraction. Applied thoughtfully, these principles can inform modern design. Imagine schools structured around stable small cohorts rather than constantly shifting large classes. Workplaces that prioritize long-term team cohesion rather than endless reorganization. Cities designed with communal gathering spaces that foster repeated interaction. Digital platforms that encourage accountability within manageable groups. None of this requires abandoning modernity. It requires integrating ancient insight. Perhaps the most profound lesson of all is humility. Those early humans were not less intelligent. They navigated environments far more immediately dangerous than ours. They read landscapes with precision. Tracked animals by subtle sign. Understood plant cycles intimately. But more importantly, they understood each other. Not perfectly. But attentively. And attention is a scarce resource today. When attention fragments, relationships thin. When relationships thin, trust erodes. When trust erodes, cooperation falters. The band protected attention. There were fewer stimuli competing for it. Faces around a fire commanded focus naturally. Modern abundance can drown that focus. Which means reclaiming intentional attention may be one of the most ancient acts we can perform. Putting devices aside during conversation. Listening without multitasking. Sharing silence without filling it. These gestures sound simple. They are evolutionarily profound. Because when two people give each other undivided attention, the old neural pathways activate. Safety signals increase. Defensiveness decreases. Connection strengthens. That was true beside a Paleolithic hearth. It is true in a modern living room. As we reach the far edge of this long reflection, notice something subtle. Throughout this entire journey, from Ice Age camps to megacities, one thread has remained constant. Human survival is relational. Technology amplifies capacity. Agriculture stabilizes food supply. Industry scales production. But none of these replace the need to belong. If anything, as systems grow more complex, belonging becomes more vital. Because complexity can overwhelm. Belonging regulates. Complexity accelerates. Belonging steadies. And so perhaps the ultimate legacy of hunter-gatherer societies is not a set of artifacts or ruins. It is a social intuition embedded in our bones. That we are strongest in circles. That fairness matters because memory is long. That laughter prevents tyranny. That sharing reduces risk. That leadership works best when it serves rather than dominates. These truths do not expire. They simply wait for rediscovery in each generation. Tonight, somewhere on Earth, a small group of people sits together. Maybe in an apartment in a crowded city. Maybe on a rooftop. Maybe in a rural village courtyard. Maybe around an actual campfire. They talk. They eat. They exchange stories. They tease gently. They express concern. They feel, perhaps without knowing why, a subtle sense of grounding. That feeling is ancient. It predates writing. Predates agriculture. Predates monuments and borders. It is the inheritance of countless small bands who survived not because they were the biggest, but because they were bonded. And if we listen carefully beneath the noise of modern life, we can still hear that inheritance whispering. Stay connected. Share wisely. Protect one another. Balance power. Laugh often. Remember who you are to each other. Because long before there were empires, there was the circle. And long after empires fade, the circle remains. And if we step even further back, beyond the romance, beyond the philosophy, we begin to see the deeper pattern beneath it all. Evolution did not select for the strongest individual. It selected for the most cohesive group. A lone human, no matter how intelligent or physically capable, was vulnerable on the prehistoric landscape. Injury, illness, or a single mistake could end a life quickly. But a bonded group could absorb shocks. If one person was injured, others gathered. If one hunter failed, another succeeded. If one mind forgot, another remembered. Resilience was distributed. That distribution of resilience may be the quiet genius of the hunter-gatherer system. It meant no single failure collapsed the whole. It meant survival was shared, not hoarded. Modern systems often centralize resilience, in institutions, governments, corporations, technologies. That can create efficiency. But it can also create fragility if trust within smaller units weakens. When trust holds locally, large systems endure stress better. Think about communities during long-term hardship. The ones that adapt most effectively are rarely those with the most resources alone. They are the ones where neighbors know each other. Where informal support networks activate quickly. Where food, information, and emotional reassurance circulate organically. That is band logic at work. Even in the most modern environment. And there is something else the ancient world understood intuitively: time. Hunter-gatherer societies operated on cyclical awareness. Seasons repeated. Animal migrations returned. Fruits ripened predictably. Scarcity and abundance alternated. This cyclical mindset fosters patience. Modern industrial culture often operates on linear acceleration, more growth, faster output, constant expansion. But human biology still resonates with rhythm more than perpetual acceleration. Work followed by rest. Effort followed by celebration. Silence followed by storytelling. The band moved in waves, not straight lines. Perhaps that is why burnout feels so destabilizing today. When cycles collapse into endless productivity, the nervous system signals imbalance. Reintroducing rhythm, regular gatherings, seasonal rituals, predictable shared meals, is not nostalgia. It is recalibration. Even language reflects this inheritance. The words companion and company both trace back to sharing bread. To eat together is to affirm alliance. That is not metaphorical flourish. It is anthropological reality. In hunter-gatherer groups, food sharing flattened hierarchy. Even skilled hunters often distributed meat widely rather than claiming it exclusively. Reputation rose through generosity, not control. Modern economic systems complicate that equation. But within our immediate circles, generosity still builds influence more effectively than domination. We admire leaders who uplift. We trust those who share credit. We distance ourselves from those who hoard recognition. Again and again, ancient social math reappears. And then there is mortality. In small bands, death was visible. Grief was communal. Loss reshaped daily life immediately. Modern societies often distance death, medically, institutionally, geographically. But when loss touches a small group, something ancient activates. People gather. Food appears at doorsteps. Stories are told to preserve memory. The circle tightens in response. Grief becomes shared weight rather than solitary burden. That instinct to gather in sorrow is as old as humanity itself. The band understood something we still struggle to articulate. Joy multiplies when shared. Sorrow softens when divided. Isolation distorts both. So perhaps the enduring message of those early societies is not about rejecting complexity. It is about grounding complexity in connection. We can build artificial intelligence. We can engineer cities that glow from orbit. We can map genomes and send machines beyond the solar system. But if we neglect the small circle, the intimate network of trust that regulates our emotional lives, progress begins to feel hollow. The hunter-gatherer band had no satellites. No skyscrapers. No global trade networks. But it possessed a stable emotional architecture. People knew where they stood. They knew who would come if they called. They knew that their contribution mattered visibly. And that knowledge quiets anxiety in ways no technology can replicate fully. As you move through your own life, through classrooms, workplaces, online platforms, public spaces, consider where your circle exists. It may be small. It should be. That is not limitation. That is design. Investing in that circle is not a retreat from modernity. It is a reinforcement of your psychological foundation. And when many small circles function well, large societies become healthier by extension. Because macrostability rests on microtrust. Always has. Always will. The fire we have been imagining throughout this journey is symbolic, yes. But it also represents something literal. A focal point. A shared center. A place where attention converges. In modern life, we must sometimes build that center intentionally. A weekly dinner. A recurring call. A study group. A ritual walk. A space where faces are familiar and voices carry history. Those gatherings may seem ordinary. They are anything but. They are the living continuation of a system that carried humanity across ice ages and into civilization. The circle is not obsolete. It is foundational. And if we honor it, not by abandoning the present, but by integrating the past, we step into the future with deeper stability. Because beneath all innovation, beneath all ambition, beneath all expansion, we are still the species that survived by sitting close together in the dark. Sharing warmth. Sharing food. Sharing stories. And choosing, again and again, to belong to one another. And maybe the most powerful part of that choice, to belong to one another, is that it has always been voluntary. Hunter-gatherer bands were not held together by walls. There were no locked gates. No prisons keeping people inside the circle. Membership endured because cooperation was beneficial. Because leaving meant greater risk. Because staying meant shared protection, shared food, shared memory. Belonging was reinforced daily through action. You helped gather. You repaired tools. You watched the children. You participated in rituals. Contribution was not abstract. It was visible. And visible contribution creates dignity. In modern systems, contribution can feel distant from outcome. You complete tasks without seeing who benefits. You interact through layers of bureaucracy. You produce, but rarely witness the full chain of impact. That distance can quietly erode meaning. Which is why small-scale projects, gardening together, volunteering locally, collaborating in tight teams, often feel deeply satisfying. You see the result. You see the faces affected. The feedback loop closes. That closed loop is ancient. There is also something profoundly regulating about physical proximity. Sitting shoulder to shoulder. Hearing synchronized laughter. Noticing subtle breathing rhythms in a shared space. Our nervous systems co-regulate in proximity. Stress hormones can decrease simply by being near trusted others. In hunter-gatherer camps, solitude was rare but not absent. Individuals wandered short distances. Hunted alone at times. Sat in personal reflection. But prolonged isolation was unusual. The baseline was togetherness. Today, many people live in extended solitude, apartments stacked high, headphones in, communication mediated through screens. Independence can be empowering. But chronic disconnection can strain mental health. The band reminds us that independence and interdependence are not opposites. They are partners. You could have individual skill in a small group, tracking, crafting, storytelling, but those skills found meaning through collective use. We still seek that balance. Personal achievement paired with shared recognition. Private reflection paired with communal celebration. Too much of one without the other tilts the system. There is another subtle inheritance from those early societies, shared responsibility for the young. Children were not raised by two isolated adults alone. They moved through a web of caregivers. Older siblings. Aunts. Uncles. Elders. Everyone monitored and guided behavior gently. This distributed caregiving lightened burden and reinforced cohesion. Modern parenting can feel isolated by comparison. The absence of wider communal support increases stress. Rebuilding networks of shared responsibility, even informally, echoes ancestral design. It also teaches children something essential. That belonging extends beyond immediate household. That safety exists in a wider circle. And what of elders? In many hunter-gatherer societies, elders carried memory. They remembered migrations, drought patterns, plant knowledge, conflict resolutions from decades past. Their value was not productivity alone. It was perspective. In fast-moving modern cultures, where innovation often eclipses memory, the role of elder wisdom can fade. Yet societies grounded in intergenerational exchange often display deeper continuity. When youth and age remain connected, resilience increases. The band functioned because every stage of life had visible purpose. No one was perfectly secure. But no one was entirely expendable. That ethos, that each member contributes uniquely, remains one of the most stabilizing social beliefs we can cultivate. As we reach the farthest stretch of this exploration, the question becomes personal. What does it mean, today, to live with awareness of this inheritance? It does not mean rejecting cities for forests. It does not mean abandoning technology. It means remembering that beneath every large structure lies a human nervous system tuned for small group life. It means designing your world, where possible, to honor that tuning. Protecting time for real conversation. Choosing quality over quantity in relationships. Allowing humor to soften ego. Practicing generosity where it can be seen and felt. Balancing autonomy with accountability. It means understanding that loneliness is not a personal flaw. It is often a signal that the circle has thinned. And circles can be rebuilt. Slowly. Intentionally. Just as they were formed long ago. The ancient campfire was not magic. It was wood and flame. But what happened around it, that was extraordinary. Humans coordinating without centralized command. Balancing individuality with group survival. Creating culture through repeated interaction. That quiet miracle is the foundation of everything we call civilization. And the remarkable truth is this. It is still available. Not in theory. In practice. Every time you gather with others and choose cooperation over competition. Every time you speak honestly and listen fully. Every time you share food, share credit, share responsibility. You are participating in a lineage tens of thousands of years old. The world has changed beyond recognition. Ice sheets have melted. Forests have shifted. Cities have risen from dust. But the circle, the small, trusting, cooperative circle, remains the most durable human invention. Long before monuments of stone. Long before written law. Long before engines and electricity. There was warmth in the dark. Faces illuminated by flame. Voices carrying stories into the night. And a group of humans who understood, without needing to write it down. That survival was shared. And in that understanding, they built us. And perhaps the most humbling realization of all is this. They did not know they were building us. They were not trying to create the future. They were trying to get through the winter. Trying to protect their children. Trying to ensure the next hunt succeeded. Trying to keep peace within a group small enough that every disagreement felt personal. Yet out of those ordinary efforts emerged the foundations of language, morality, cooperation, and culture. It is easy to assume that history is shaped only by grand figures and monumental events. But for most of human existence, history was shaped by evenings like the one we have returned to again and again. A few dozen people. A shared meal. A story told carefully so it would be remembered. A dispute resolved before it fractured the group. A child comforted before sleep. No headlines. No recorded dates. Just continuity. And continuity, sustained long enough, becomes civilization. When we look at towering skylines or vast digital networks, we are witnessing scale layered upon that continuity. But scale is not the origin. Relationship is. If you stripped away infrastructure tomorrow, what would matter first? Who you trust. Who you can call. Who would open their door? Who would share food? Who would stand beside you? That priority list has not changed in 40,000 years. Technology can extend reach. It cannot replace trust. Institutions can organize millions. They cannot substitute for belonging. And so the lesson of hunter-gatherer life may not be about returning to the past. It may be about remembering proportion. Ambition is powerful. Innovation is necessary. Expansion can be extraordinary. But none of it stabilizes without circles of mutual care. Progress without connection feels brittle. Connection without progress can feel stagnant. Human thriving seems to require both, the wide horizon and the close circle. Our ancestors lived with a vast horizon every day. The sky above them was unobstructed. The land stretched beyond sight. Predators and weather reminded them constantly of scale. And within that immensity, they maintained something intimate. A social microclimate of warmth inside a dangerous macroclimate. That metaphor may be more relevant now than ever. The modern world is vast. Information floods in from every direction. Global events shift daily realities. The horizon feels infinite and unpredictable. Creating small social microclimates, spaces of reliability and trust, becomes not indulgence, but necessity. It is how nervous systems stay balanced. It is how empathy survives complexity. It is how courage sustains itself. Because courage rarely emerges from isolation. It emerges from knowing someone stands behind you. Even the boldest hunter did not roam indefinitely alone. They returned. They reported. They redistributed what they gained. Return is as important as exploration. Modern culture celebrates exploration relentlessly, career growth, travel, achievement, expansion. But return, to community, to shared space, to accountability, completes the cycle. Without return, exploration becomes exile. With return, it becomes contribution. And that may be the final echo from those ancient camps. Go out into the world. Hunt. Gather. Learn. Build. Explore. But come back. Bring what you have gained into the circle. Share it. Let others benefit. Let others question it. Let others refine it. That exchange transforms individual success into collective resilience. The hunter-gatherer band was small, yes. But it was not closed to growth. It absorbed new members. It adapted to new terrains. It experimented constantly, new tools, new routes, new alliances. It was dynamic, not static. What kept it stable was not rigidity. It was relational glue. Trust flexible enough to adjust without shattering. And that kind of flexibility may be the most urgent skill for our time. The world will continue changing. Technologies will accelerate. Economies will shift. Climates will evolve. But if small circles remain strong, if people continue practicing fairness, humor, generosity, accountability, shared storytelling, adaptation remains possible. The first humans who gathered in bands could not predict agriculture. They could not imagine cities. They could not foresee satellites orbiting Earth. But they established something more enduring than any specific innovation. They established the habit of cooperation. And habits, repeated across millennia, become inheritance. So as this long reflection finally draws toward stillness, picture once more that ancient group settling into sleep. No certainty about tomorrow. No guarantee of success. But confidence in one thing. They would face it together. That confidence is the thread connecting then to now. It hums beneath our most modern lives. It steadies us in uncertainty. It reminds us that while tools change, the core equation does not. Shared effort reduces risk. Shared warmth reduces fear. Shared story creates identity. Shared responsibility creates resilience. Long before there were nations. Long before there were markets. Long before there were written laws. There were circles of humans choosing to remain connected. And everything we have become rests, quietly and invisibly, on that choice. And maybe what makes that choice so extraordinary is that it must be renewed constantly. Belonging is not a single decision made once. It is a pattern of behavior repeated daily. In the ancient band, no one could rely on yesterday's cooperation to guarantee tomorrow's. Trust had to be maintained. Food had to be shared again. Conflicts had to be addressed again. Contribution had to be visible again. Continuity was built from repetition. Modern life sometimes promises permanence, contracts, titles, digital records, long-term plans. But underneath those structures, the same truth remains: relationships endure through ongoing care, not formal labels. You cannot automate trust. You cannot outsource belonging. You cannot mass-produce intimacy. Those things still grow the same way they did around a Paleolithic fire, slowly, through shared time and mutual reliability. There is something beautifully grounding about that. It means the most advanced society on Earth still depends on very basic human acts. Showing up. Listening. Sharing. Repairing. Laughing. Forgiving. Repeating. In hunter-gatherer groups, repair was particularly important. If resentment festered too long, the group fractured, and fracture meant danger. So mechanisms evolved for reintegration. Joking, mediation, temporary distancing, ritual acknowledgement, all ways to prevent small conflicts from becoming permanent splits. We are not so different. Friendships falter. Families strain. Teams miscommunicate. The difference between collapse and resilience often lies in whether repair happens. And repair requires humility. The band could not afford prolonged ego battles. Survival favored those willing to recalibrate. In large modern systems, ego can hide more easily. People can withdraw into anonymity or switch circles without addressing damage. But in our closest relationships, the ancient rule still applies. Unrepaired fractures weaken the whole. Repair strengthens it. This brings us to perhaps the quietest inheritance of all: mutual vulnerability. In a small band, everyone eventually experienced weakness, injury, illness, grief, exhaustion. And because survival required cooperation, vulnerability was not purely shameful. It was part of the cycle. Today, vulnerability is often masked. We curate competence. We present polished versions of ourselves. Yet the strongest bonds still form when people are seen in imperfection and remain accepted. That dynamic is ancient. To be fully known and still included, that is the core of belonging. Hunter-gatherer life offered little room for illusion. Your skills were visible. Your limits were known. Your personality unfolded in daily proximity. And yet, people stayed. They adjusted to one another. They learned each other's rhythms. There is profound reassurance in that model. It suggests that thriving does not require flawlessness. It requires integration. As we stand in an era defined by unprecedented speed, the old circle offers one more lesson: slowness has value. Conversations that wander without agenda. Meals that stretch beyond necessity. Rituals repeated even when their original practical purpose has faded. These rhythms anchor memory. They create shared history. They slow time just enough for connection to deepen. Without slowness, relationships remain surface level. Without shared memory, identity thins. The band's life was not leisurely, it was labor-intensive. But its social pace allowed repetition and recognition. Faces were not constantly replaced. Stories were not instantly forgotten. Reputation accumulated over years, not moments. In a world where attention shifts rapidly, choosing slowness in certain spaces is almost rebellious. And deeply restorative. So where does all of this leave us? Not in a forest. Not abandoning the modern world. But perhaps holding a clearer lens. Understanding that beneath our ambitions and anxieties lies an ancient social blueprint. When we feel disoriented, it may be because our circle is too thin. When we feel overexposed, it may be because scale has exceeded intimacy. When we feel powerless, it may be because contribution feels invisible. The remedy is not regression. It is recalibration. Strengthen the small group. Clarify contribution. Practice visible generosity. Encourage humor that humbles rather than humiliates. Resolve conflict before it calcifies. Share food. Share stories. Share responsibility. These are not quaint traditions. They are structural supports for the human psyche. And they have endured longer than any empire, ideology, or technology we have built. The hunter-gatherer band did not leave behind skyscrapers. It left behind something more durable. A relational template. One that continues to operate quietly in classrooms, kitchens, workplaces, neighborhoods, and gatherings of friends. Long after monuments crumble. Long after trends fade. Long after today's innovations become tomorrow's archaeology. Humans will still gather in small circles. They will still seek warmth, literal or symbolic. They will still measure trust through repeated action. They will still find meaning in shared effort. And somewhere, in some future we cannot imagine, a small group will sit together under a sky, perhaps on another planet, perhaps in a city we have not yet built. And they will talk. And laugh. And resolve a disagreement. And comfort a child. And share what they have gathered. And in that moment, without necessarily knowing it, they will be participating in the same ancient inheritance that carried our species through ice and uncertainty, through hunger and triumph, through countless unrecorded nights around forgotten fires. The circle endures. Not because it is nostalgic. Not because it is simple. But because it works. And as long as humans remain human, it always will. And if we let our imagination move one step further, beyond even Earth, the pattern still holds. Picture a future habitat on a distant planet. Steel instead of wood. Recycled air instead of forest wind. Artificial light instead of fire. But inside that habitat, what determines whether the mission succeeds? Not machinery alone. Not navigation systems. Not engineering precision. Those matter deeply. But survival will still hinge on whether a small group of humans can cooperate under pressure. Whether they can manage conflict without fracture. Whether they can distribute responsibility fairly. Whether humor can soften tension in confinement. Whether someone notices when another grows too quiet. That is hunter-gatherer psychology in a space suit. No matter how far we travel, we carry the circle with us. Because the circle is not geography. It is pattern. And patterns endure. It is tempting to believe that sophistication replaces simplicity. But often sophistication rests upon it. The most complex software still depends on stable base code. Human civilization still depends on small group trust. Remove that layer, and everything above it destabilizes. Strengthen it, and complexity becomes manageable. This is why revolutions often begin in living rooms. Why artistic movements form in tight communities. Why scientific breakthroughs frequently emerge from small, collaborative teams. Why support groups change lives more effectively than broad announcements. The energy that shifts history tends to concentrate first in intimate clusters. That is not coincidence. It is inheritance. Even language itself evolved in small groups. Tone, rhythm, metaphor, all refined through face-to-face exchange. Our capacity for nuanced communication grew because proximity demanded precision. Miscommunication had immediate consequences. Clarity mattered. Today, words can travel instantly across continents. But their impact is still shaped by how they are received in small circles. Meaning crystallizes locally before spreading outward. And perhaps that is the quiet invitation hidden in this long reflection. To honor the scale at which we are most alive. We can participate in vast systems. We can care about global issues. We can engage in networks that span the planet. But our deepest influence, and our deepest nourishment, often exist within reach. Within eyesight. Within conversation. Within shared meals. The hunter-gatherer band thrived not because it controlled the world. But because it tended its immediate world carefully. It noticed subtle shifts. It adapted quickly. It corrected imbalance before it expanded. It celebrated success collectively. It mourned loss collectively. It understood that survival was not a solo achievement. That understanding remains available. When we feel overwhelmed by the scale of modern challenges, we can return to proportional action. Strengthen your circle. Support your local network. Contribute visibly. Model fairness. Practice repair. Extend empathy outward, beginning inward. Large change is often the accumulation of many small, stable circles. And there is something deeply empowering in that. It means no one is too small to matter. In a hunter-gatherer band, every member affected the whole. Skill sets varied, but presence itself carried weight. Your mood influenced others. Your generosity inspired reciprocation. Your resentment disrupted balance. You mattered. That truth has not expired. In your own circles, you still matter disproportionately. Your consistency stabilizes. Your attention reassures. Your humor relieves tension. Your absence is felt. This is not pressure. It is significance. We are shaped for interdependence. When we embrace that, rather than resisting it in the name of extreme self-sufficiency, something relaxes. The illusion of total independence fades. The relief of shared burden appears. And perhaps that is the final echo from those ancient nights beneath the open sky. You were never meant to carry everything alone. Not then. Not now. Long before institutions. Long before industry. Long before digital connection. There were small groups of humans who survived because they trusted one another enough to share the weight of existence. That trust did not eliminate hardship. It transformed it. It turned fear into collective vigilance. Scarcity into coordinated effort. Uncertainty into shared watchfulness. And darkness into a circle of light. The fire may look different today. It may glow from a screen. It may flicker from a candle on a dining table. It may shine from streetlights in a city square. But whenever humans gather with intention, honesty, and mutual care, the ancient pattern activates again. The circle closes. The noise softens. The inheritance continues. And in that continuation, across ice ages and empires, across revolutions and technological leaps, across everything we have built and everything we have yet to build, we remain what we have always been. A species that survives, thrives, and finds meaning. Not alone in the vastness, but together. In circles of trust. And if we are honest with ourselves, there is something profoundly reassuring in that continuity. Because it means that no matter how complicated the world becomes, the core instructions do not multiply endlessly. They remain surprisingly few. Stay connected. Share what you can. Notice one another. Resolve conflict before it hardens. Protect the vulnerable. Balance power. Repeat. The hunter-gatherer band did not possess a written constitution, yet it operated by principles that modern societies still struggle to encode effectively. Equality was maintained not through formal law, but through constant social calibration. Arrogance was trimmed through humor. Greed was discouraged through expectation of distribution. Leadership was granted situationally, not permanently. These were not abstract ideals. They were daily practices. And practices shape culture more reliably than declarations. Even today, the most functional small groups rarely rely on rigid authority alone. They rely on mutual respect. They rely on members who speak up when something feels unfair. They rely on shared standards enforced through relationship rather than distant punishment. The band teaches that social health is active work. It does not sustain itself automatically. And yet, it also shows that this work can be woven into ordinary life. No grand ceremony required. Just attention. Just participation. Just willingness to remain engaged. In large-scale modern societies, disengagement can feel easy. You can scroll instead of speak. Observe instead of contribute. Leave without explanation. But in small circles, disengagement carries weight. Presence matters. That can feel demanding. It can also feel deeply meaningful. Because when presence matters, you matter. The ancient circle provided that constant reminder. You were not replaceable in a casual sense. You were a known quantity in a shared ecosystem. Today, we sometimes fear that we are interchangeable, one profile among millions, one worker among thousands. Rebuilding small, stable communities counters that anxiety. In a circle of trust, your absence is noticed. Your story is remembered. Your growth is witnessed. Witnessing is one of the most powerful human acts. To be seen over time, to have someone say, "I remember when you struggled with that," or "I've watched you change," creates continuity of identity. Hunter-gatherer life ensured that witnessing happened naturally. Modern life requires us to cultivate it intentionally. And perhaps that intentional cultivation is the bridge between past and future. We cannot return to Ice Age landscapes. Nor should we idealize them. But we can carry forward the relational wisdom refined there. As humanity steps into increasingly uncharted territory, artificial intelligence reshaping work. Climate shifts redefining geography, rapid cultural evolution transforming norms, uncertainty will be constant. Uncertainty is not new. Our ancestors lived with it daily. What stabilized them was not certainty about outcomes. It was certainty about each other. They did not know if the hunt would succeed. They knew who would walk beside them. They did not know if winter would be harsh. They knew they would share what they had. That kind of certainty is portable. It does not depend on technology or era. It depends on commitment. And commitment, like everything else in the band, is renewed through action. So perhaps the final lesson is simple, though not easy. Invest in your circle. Not superficially. Not occasionally. But consistently. Because within that circle lies disproportionate influence over your resilience, your mental balance, your capacity for courage, and your sense of meaning. The hunter-gatherer band lasted for tens of thousands of years, far longer than any empire, ideology, or economic system we have created since. It endured because it aligned with human design. We are relational creatures navigating vast environments. We are storytellers seeking shared identity. We are problem solvers strengthened by cooperation. We are vulnerable bodies stabilized by proximity. Nothing about modernity erases those truths. If anything, modernity makes remembering them more urgent. And so, as this long journey through time comes to rest, imagine again the quiet circle beneath a sky filled with stars. No monuments. No borders. No recorded history. Just humans choosing, night after night, to remain together. To share warmth. To share effort. To share responsibility. That choice, repeated across millennia, carried our species from fragile beginnings to global civilization. And it remains available to you, not as nostalgia, not as fantasy. But as practice. The circle endures because we continue to create it. And as long as we do, we will never be navigating the vastness alone.